Okay, the winner of the office category was another Australian. The project is Darling Quarter, and the architects were Francis Jones, Morehen, Thorp.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your office, and then talk to us about this project, this winning project.
Look, our office has been established for about 10 years. We grew out of another office, Mitchell, Jurger and Thorp, whose largest project in Australia at least was New Parliament House in Canberra. And we had a Sydney and a Canberra office, and about 10 years ago it became apparent that we were officers in our own right, and we mutually agreed to split. Still great friends, and there's my former colleagues here today.
Did they win anything?
No, I don't think so, but they were shortlisted, so. 10 years established. There's two directors, myself and my partner, Richard Francis Jones. We've got about 80 people. Our main office is in Sydney, but we have an office in Melbourne, a project office in Canberra, and recently established an office in the UK. We were fortunate enough to win a major project for Oxford University. So we work primarily in Australia, but we are increasingly working offshore as well. So we've had major commissions in New Zealand, here in Singapore, and most recently in Europe.
So tell us about this project then, the one that won the category.
Look, this project is an office development. It's situated in Sydney, in what is an area which is the primary entertainment precinct, family entertainment precinct of Sydney, Darling Harbour. So putting an office in a park was quite an unusual commission, and I guess our project was all about trying to overcome that traditional paradigm of the corporate nature or privatisation of the ground plane. So this project is a sizable development. It's 65,000 square metres. It accommodates 6,500 workers. But a major element of the focus was the ground plane, creating public facilities, and in particular, a very large children's play space.
Because it doesn't look like an office. It looks more like a shopping centre or an entertainment complex or something like that. So how do you bring the public into what is essentially a private office space?
Well, we were, as you can see from that image, we've stepped the form, so there's a lower, more human scale towards the park. That primary facade is finished in a layer of timber, so there's operable timber louvers that control solar gain and glare. So there's a lot of natural materials, quite transparent, so there's an engagement with the office space and the public domain. And the base of the office accommodation is actually raised one level, so that the ground plane is turned over to more public facilities. So there's a range of restaurants, cafes, bars. There's a children's theatre in the ground level of the building. And of course there's a major public domain element of the project, 19,000 square metres of public domain, which incorporates this very innovative children's play space where we collaborate very closely with our wonderful landscape architects Aspect. So it was truly to create, recognising the attributes of that space has been the driver of our development.
And who's it for? Who occupies the office? Who is the client?
Our client was Lendlease. They were the developers, and we were lucky enough they were also the constructors, so they sat with us all the way through the process. And the building's fully tenanted by the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. Okay.
And so where did this impetus to have these public uses come from? Was that from the developer? Was it from the city authorities? Was it from you? Who drove that idea?
Very much a collaboration of all of that. I think there was a recognition from all parties that this was quite a special site. There was a previous development on the site. It was a failed Sega World, which was meant to be offering entertainment, but it became very underutilised, and it was also very much a barrier to the city. So an aspiration of the project was to really address the urban issues, and that was done in a very transparent and open process. The project was won in a competitive process by the developers and also with the design. So again, it was very much a development that evolved and was subject to review prior to implementation.
And this notion of having public uses in an office building, is that something that could only really happen here because of the circumstances of the site, or is it a typology that could be used more commonly in other locations?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. Our practice has very much been renowned for doing public projects. We do a lot of university, a bit like John, we actually compete against John very much. So we do a lot of university work, we do a lot of libraries, We've just finished a major performing arts centre, museums. So then being asked to look at commercial work as well, I guess we've kind of thought a little bit more holistically about that. And I think it's fair to say, our community facilities are becoming more hybrid in their nature. So often libraries that we're invited to do are more than a library. They become community meeting spaces and have a whole series of overlaid function. And I think it's very natural that we start thinking about that for our workplace. There's an increasing mobility of workers. They're no longer tied to desks. They're empowered. They're mobile. They move not only around their own workplace but out into the city. So having a building that more responds to that and more knitting together these sort of overlapped functions makes a lot of sense.
And it's only fair, isn't it? Because work doesn't only take place in the office now. You work in the cafe and the park and
exactly right.
the home. So it's only fair that those other uses come into the office.
I firmly believe that, and I guess we've become more sophisticated as well. I think when some of this more contemporary workplace initiatives started to filter through, I think people were worried that if they weren't sitting at their desk, they would be seen as not working. But no longer are we individuals just tapping away at computers. More and more we're collaborative, and we need a range of settings to do that. And you're right, as much work I think gets done within the office these days as it does in peripheral areas like cafes and restaurants that support that collaboration and engagement.
And a lot of the offices that you read about in the magazines and the websites and things like that are companies like Google or Facebook, kind of very innovative companies. They often have very innovative workspaces, but they're still private campuses, aren't they? They're still, you go through a gate and then that's Google land and the public aren't allowed in and all the facilities are only for the staff.
Well, I think there's an inevitability about that. Obviously, we live also in unfortunate times where security, etc., are increasing issues. There's also IP relative to the work that anyone produces. So I think in recognition of that, there is a range of palettes of spaces being embraced by offices. Not only now is it just sort of pancaked floors. This building, for example, has a huge atrium that's full of natural light. The tenant has responded to the attributes of that building, lots of social engagement, circulation spaces and activity around that. But then there's a recognition that, as I was saying before, that people aren't just tied to their workplace anymore and the city is their workplace. So it's that natural blurring of those boundaries I think will happen.
Great, well it's a fascinating project. Well done on winning the category and good luck for later on.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Cheers.